It was supposed to be an ordinary evening commute, a quiet ride home after a long shift at work. But what unfolded on a Charlotte light rail train would become one of the most horrifying, senseless, and politically charged crimes in recent memory. A young woman, beautiful, kind, full of dreams, stepped onto a train seeking nothing more than safety, peace, and a better life in America. Instead, she would never make it home. Tonight, we're diving into the chilling story of Iryna Zarutska, a 23-year-old waitress who escaped the devastation of war in Ukraine, only to meet a brutal and unthinkable end in the very place she thought would give her freedom. This is not just a crime story. It's a story about system failure, about warnings ignored, about politics, outrage, and a nation divided over what justice should look like. What happened to Iryna could have happened to anyone. And as the disturbing details unfold, one question becomes impossible to escape. How many red flags does it take before someone steps in? Iryna's story begins thousands of miles away, in a land torn apart by war. When Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022, Iryna and her family made the heartbreaking decision to leave their home behind. Like countless refugees, they searched for safety, for stability, for a place where they could rebuild their lives. America was supposed to be that place. In Charlotte, North Carolina, Iryna quickly built a modest but hopeful new life. She worked shifts at a local pizza parlor, saved money for college, and nurtured dreams of becoming a veterinarian. Friends described her as radiant, compassionate, someone who loved animals and cared deeply for people. She was building a future brick by brick, never imagining it could all be stolen in an instant. But as Iryna's life was unfolding with promise, another life was spiraling out of control. A man named DeCarlo Brown, 34 years old, with a long and violent criminal history, was moving through the shadows of society unchecked. Arrested more than a dozen times, convicted of armed robbery, and battling schizophrenia, Brown had become a case study in the failures of the criminal justice system. He had been given chances, far too many chances, only to slip back into violence and chaos. And yet, somehow he was free. September 5, 2024. Surveillance cameras on the Charlotte light rail captured the moment Iryna stepped onto the train after her shift. She looked tired but peaceful, finding a seat like countless other passengers. Just a normal night. But behind her, another passenger sat quietly watching. DeCarlo Brown. The video, later described as one of the most chilling pieces of surveillance footage ever released in the city, shows Brown slowly reaching into his pocket. He pulls out a small folding knife, turning it in his hands. Then, without a word, without provocation, he stands. He lunges forward, and in an instant, the piece of that train shatters forever. Brown plunges the knife into Iryna. Strangers scream. Chaos erupts. For a few moments, Iryna doesn't even seem to realize how badly she's been wounded. But the horror has already begun. Her life, her dreams, are slipping away. And Brown? He simply walks off the train. Calm, almost casual, leaving behind devastation and shock that would soon ripple across the nation. Panic swept through the light rail car. Witnesses scrambled to help, some rushing to Iryna's side as others fled in terror, unsure if the attacker would return. Calls to 911 flooded in. Passengers described a nightmare unfolding in real time. A young woman bleeding out in front of strangers, attacked for no reason at all. When paramedics arrived, they fought to save her. But the wounds were too deep, the damage too severe. At just 23 years old, Iryna's life slipped away, far from the home she once knew, far from the future she had dreamed of. Police quickly identified the suspect as DeCarlo Brown, and what they uncovered about him would send shockwaves through the community. Brown wasn't just some unknown drifter. He had a rap sheet stretching back years, 14 arrests, a 5-year prison sentence for armed robbery, and numerous incidents of violent behavior. Time after time, he was released. Time after time, red flags were ignored. His mother later revealed that Brown suffered from schizophrenia, a mental illness that, left untreated, can warp reality itself. But instead of receiving long-term treatment or being kept in a secure facility, Brown had been allowed to drift in and out of the system. In fact, he had been arrested just months earlier, only to be released again on no cash bail. To many, the murder of Iryna Zarutska was not just a personal tragedy. It was a glaring example of what happens when a broken system prioritizes second chances for dangerous criminals over the safety of innocent citizens. And this case, unlike so many others, wasn't destined to stay local for long. As the gruesome surveillance video began to circulate, the story exploded on social media. The randomness of the attack, the vulnerability of the victim, the long history of the suspect, it all became too much to ignore. Soon, the story reached the very top of American politics. Former President Donald Trump, never one to shy away from controversy, seized on the case. In a fiery statement, he called Iryna a beautiful young girl that never had problems in life, with a magnificent future in this country, and now she's dead. He blamed weak leadership, soft on-crime policies, and a system that, in his words, let a lunatic walk free. Trump's comments ignited a firestorm. Supporters saw him as finally giving voice to a tragedy the mainstream media had downplayed. Critics accused him of exploiting Iryna's death for political gain. But one thing was clear. The case of Iryna Zarytska had gone from a heartbreaking local crime to a national symbol of outrage. Even billionaire entrepreneur Elon Musk weighed in, tweeting his disbelief and anger, suggesting that America had lost its sense of justice and accountability. When voices as powerful as Trump and Musk converge on a single story, the nation listens and debates. Meanwhile, in Charlotte, the pain was personal. Vigils were held. Flowers, candles, and photographs of Iryna piled up at makeshift memorials. Friends described her as sunshine in human form, a young woman who loved animals, who wanted to heal, who only sought peace after fleeing the devastation of war. For them, this was not about politics. This was about a life stolen. But for others, the conversation turned quickly to the failures of leadership. City officials faced scathing criticism for allowing the light rail to become a place where a defenseless young woman could be slaughtered in her seat. The mayor's statements, seen as lukewarm and politically calculated, only fueled the anger. And then came another point of outrage, one that shocked many Americans even further. As the story spread, something strange and deeply disturbing began to happen. While local outlets in Charlotte covered the case with urgency, many national networks stayed silent. Days went by before mainstream media gave Iryna's killing the attention it clearly deserved. Critics accused them of deliberately downplaying the story because it didn't fit a preferred narrative: a white refugee woman murdered by a black man with a violent history. On social media, the anger boiled over. Commentators demanded to know, why was the nation not hearing about Iryna Zarytska? Why was her name not on every headline, every broadcast, every nightly newscast? For some, the silence was deafening and political. They compared the case to the Jordan Neely incident in New York, where a homeless black man's death sparked weeks of protests and wall-to-wall coverage. Here, the victim was white, the suspect black, and the outrage from the media class was muted. The Charlotte Observer described it best: the case had become politicized. And it wasn't just conservative commentators who noticed. Ordinary citizens, mothers, fathers, young women who rode those trains every day, they all felt the disconnect. A brutal, random murder of a refugee seeking safety in America, and yet the national media seemed reluctant to talk about it. That hesitation only fueled the fury. Soon, politicians across the spectrum were forced to respond. Mayor Vi Lyles of Charlotte called the killing senseless and tragic. North Carolina's governor, Josh Stein, demanded more police patrols and warned of a growing crisis in public trust. But for many, words were not enough. They wanted answers. They wanted accountability. They wanted change. And as the debate raged, the community responded in ways that no politician could have orchestrated. On August 31st, just 9 days after the murder, hundreds gathered for a candlelight vigil at the very station where Iryna was killed. They held signs, prayed, and wept together. Strangers who had never met Iryna spoke of how deeply her story touched them. Parents said they feared for their daughters. Young women said they no longer felt safe riding the train alone. The city announced another vigil for September 22nd, 30 days after her death. It was a solemn reminder that this tragedy would not be forgotten. But the response didn't stop there. Across Charlotte, and eventually across the country, murals of Iryna's face began to appear. Artists painted her smiling portrait on walls, bus stops, and even churches. She became more than a victim. She became a symbol, a reminder of both the dangers lurking in plain sight and the innocence of a life cut short. Even the music world responded. Charlotte-born rapper DaBaby released a tribute song titled Save Me, dedicated to Iryna. The track, raw and emotional, poured gasoline on a fire that was already burning nationwide. Fans shared it across platforms, turning her story into something larger than a crime report. It became part of the culture. And yet, while the tributes honored her, the questions surrounding her death only grew louder. How could a man with 14 arrests, a violent past, and untreated schizophrenia have been walking free on that train? Why was he not in treatment, not monitored, not stopped before he could take a life? Why had countless warnings from his own mother been ignored? Even more damning, why was security so lax on the light rail that no one was there to intervene in time? Officers were only one car away. Cameras caught the murder in chilling detail. But for Iryna, there was no one between her and the blade. For many Americans, the answer was clear. The system failed. Failed to protect the public, failed to protect Iryna, failed to deliver on the basic promise of safety. And as those failures were debated in city halls and on national stages, one haunting reality remained. A 23-year-old refugee who fled war for safety in America had found only another battlefield. The outrage didn't stop at Charlotte's borders. It stormed into the halls of politics, igniting a fire that stretched all the way to Washington, D.C. At a speech inside the Museum of the Bible, former President Donald Trump thundered about the case. His words cut deep. She was slaughtered by a deranged monster. A beautiful young girl with a magnificent future, and now she's dead. When you have horrible killings, you must take horrible actions. He pointed the finger at local leaders, at judges who let dangerous men slip through the cracks, and at prosecutors who, in his words, cared more about criminals than victims. His message was clear: America's justice system had failed Iryna, and if nothing changed, it would fail again. Elon Musk, never one to stay silent, blasted out his own outrage. He accused city officials and weak prosecutors of allowing criminals to roam free. Millions saw his posts, millions shared them. Suddenly, Iryna's name was on the lips of the most powerful men in the country. And yet, with every headline, every speech, every political debate, one question lingered. Was Iryna being remembered or used? For grieving friends and family, it didn't matter who was talking about her. What mattered was that she was gone. Their daughter, their sister, their friend, taken in the most senseless way imaginable. Meanwhile, the wheels of justice began to turn. DeCarlos Brown Jr. was formally charged with first-degree murder in North Carolina State Court. Federal prosecutors piled on with their own charge, committing an act causing death on a mass transit system. But Brown's future didn't lie in a courtroom, at least not yet. A judge ordered him to undergo a 60-day psychiatric evaluation. For many, it felt like insult on top of injury. Here was a man with 14 arrests, violent outbursts, and a mother begging for help. The system had ignored him at every turn. And now, even after a murder, the first instinct was not to punish, but to evaluate. To many Americans, it was proof of everything broken, and the failures went beyond justice. Transit officials admitted Brown hadn't even paid for his ticket that night. He'd slipped past fair enforcement, just as he had slipped past accountability his entire life. In response, the Charlotte area transit system promised more fair inspections, more security staff, more cameras. But for Iryna, those promises came too late. Her killing sparked debates on mental health reform, bail reform, and transit security. Politicians promised change, but the people of Charlotte knew better. They'd heard it all before. What they couldn't ignore was the raw pain, and the way ordinary citizens fought to keep Iryna's memory alive. Candlelight vigils turned into murals. Murals turned into songs. Songs turned into movements. Across the nation, people who never met Iryna were speaking her name. They refused to let her story fade into another statistic. But beyond the politics, beyond the debates, beyond the culture wars, there is something else. Something haunting. Something that sticks in the mind long after the headlines move on. It's the image of a young woman, tired after her shift at a pizza shop, stepping onto a train. A girl who loved animals. A daughter who missed her father back in Ukraine. A sister who wanted to heal, to study, to make something of her new life in America. It's the image of her sitting down, unaware that death was sitting just one seat away. And it's the question every viewer must ask themselves. How many more? How many more innocent lives must be shattered before someone finally says, enough? Because in the end, this is not just about Charlotte. Not just about one train, one victim, or one killer. It's about a system that looked away too many times. A system that gambled with safety and lost. Iryna Zarutska escaped the bombs and bloodshed of Ukraine, only to die on a train in North Carolina. Her story is a tragedy, but it is also a warning. A warning of what happens when justice is ignored, when mental illness goes untreated, when safety becomes an afterthought. Tonight, her name lives on, in murals, in songs, in vigils lit by candlelight. But her death leaves us with a chilling truth. If it could happen to Iryna, it could happen to any of us.